Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Chris. This is a donated request from Salim. I hope I'm saying your name right. The 100 Years War on Palestine. I'm sorry. The 100 Years War on #Palestine with journalist Chris Hedges and President Hamza. We'll never know. Nope, it's not there anymore. I'm covering it with my thumb, so you guys obviously can't see it now. So this was, we already did part 1, and we're going to do part 2 right now. There you go.
I think, yeah, Jabotinsky's, I mean, that was his brainchild.
Right. I mean, the Palestinians did have them, and it wasn't so much, you're right that they banned them, and of course they banned Palestinian newspapers and all this kind of stuff, but it was that they refused to grant them any legitimacy, any legal status. And especially with the Palestinian revolt, the British not only arm Zionist militias, but going back to your point about house demolitions, targeted assault, they taught those counterinsurgency techniques that they had used in India, used in Ireland. They taught them to these Zionist leaders who use them to this day. So yeah, there was a complete erasure of Palestinian identity under the British mandate. And that wasn't done for altruism or any love of Jews. It was done because they saw the Jewish minority as an effective arm of colonial control. And up until 1939, that was true. And then, of course, when they had to limit, because they realized that the war was going to be fought throughout the Middle East, and they needed allies. When they limited Jewish immigration into Palestine, then the Jewish terrorist groups, the Stern Gang and these others, carried out all sorts of terrorist attacks, not only against Palestinians, but against the British, including blowing up the headquarters of at the King David Hotel, killing, I can't remember what it was, 61 or something British.
I think there were 92. I think it was that. Yeah.
So, but at the same time, the Zionists very astutely pivoted, and they found a new patron in the United States.
Right.
And that is again a theme of Rashid's book, that because, and this, he would even argue, and this was, I knew Arafat, of course, that this was also true within the PLO, that they understood perhaps the Arab world, but they really didn't understand much outside the confines of the Arab world, and that has always hampered the Palestinians, their resistance movements, whereas so much of the Zionist leadership is actually drawn. I mean, Netanyahu is a case in point, raised in Philadelphia, went to MIT, and so...
Netanyahu was raised in Philadelphia? Did not know that at all. Interesting. Was he born in Philadelphia? I mean, in West Philadelphia, he was born and raised. On the playground is where he spent most of his days, right? Did you get that one?
The Palestinians have always been hampered, Rashid would argue in his book, I think correctly, by never having roots. Now, that's changing with the next generation. So we see all of these protests, which are very heartening, mostly by very young, I mean young by my standards, in their 20s, I mean kids who are bilingual and bicultural. And that, of course, is terrifying to the Israeli state, which is why they work so hard to outlaw, as they have at Columbia, Students for Justice in Palestine, along with Jewish Voices for Peace. It's why they go after the BDS activists on campus. Not because these campuses are even remotely considering divesting or imposing sanctions or anything else, but because as an educational tool, it's been so effective. And as they lose support among the new generation of Jews who don't have that old emotional attachment to, what Amir Haas calls fantasy Israel, as they lose that attachment, then of course they build stronger and stronger alliances with the Christian Zionists, the Christian right, who are, number one, anti-Semitic, and number two, I would argue, essentially the face of American fascism.
Interesting, yeah.
Can I just quickly point out something that I cannot look past. I despise a cluttered bookshelf. And you're talking to somebody. You're watching somebody talk right now who has a cluttered bookshelf. Not that bad. It's making me want to go over in there right now. It's actually that way, but I'm going to point that way because that's true to the camera. I want to go in right now. I'm going to pause this video and just clean out my bookshelf, looking at his bookshelf. Has nothing to do with what we're discussing, but I've been watching it for 25 minutes and 34 seconds. I'm not even watching him talk. I don't think I've watched anyone really speak. I'm looking at the bookshelf and I'm just inside fuming. I'm like, let's take all these. Let's get this book right here. Let's take it off the shelf. These books, take them off the shelf. I am listening to what's being said, by the way. I'm not ignoring it. But I can't get past that bookshelf. I do apologize, but I had to point it out.
And I think another thing that's been really extraordinary, and Dr. Khadidi definitely mentions this towards the end of the book, that he felt that it was very important for the Israeli Jews also to that they have to come up and really recognize what's been happening. But what's been really powerful, I think, in the U.S. is so many of the Jewish community in this country has shown up. I mean, a lot of these protests have been from within the Jewish community, and I think that this younger generation is just, they're seeing a whole different perspective. I think, obviously the Palestinian resistance has made a lot of egregious mistakes that we would all hopefully agree on. But I think people are recognizing that, Alden, I and the public both know what all school children must learn. Those to whom evil is done, do evil in return. And I think people really forget that the Palestinians historically are profoundly peaceful people. If you actually look in the 19th century, there were over 3,000 published travel logs by visitors to Palestine from Europe that were visiting the Holy Lands. Over 3,000. None of them mention violence or having some horrific time because of the belligerence of the people. They, historically.
But to be fair, there wasn't any need or any reason for people to visit when it was Palestinian controlled, and to Palestinians had they could go the whole area, so there wouldn't be any reason for someone else to show up and say, oh, they were very violent, they were so mean, they were this. Why would they be? And I mean that from the standpoint of nothing had been taken away from them, so they weren't mad about anything. I'm a happy person. But if today my government showed up and kicked me out of the house, yeah, I'd be really angry. Understandably so. I would want to burn my own house down so that no one else could have it. I'd want to get my stuff out, PlayStation 5. I don't need a TV. I'll just hook it up to somebody else's. But, you understand what I'm saying. No one is going to write about how terrible and mean someone is because they haven't been through what is to come. So I'm countering that, what he said. Or, no, I'm not countering. I guess I'm adding perspective to it. Countering it. I'm doing something. I mean, I don't know what it is.
They have been a profoundly welcoming people to other people. And that's why there's so many really ethnic groups that have kind of come into that land from different places. I mean, you have Circassians, you have the Maghariba, which the Moroccan quarter that was actually destroyed I think in 1967. That was a historical quarter where you had all of these Moroccans who had migrated to be in the Holy Land, to be near the Haram Sharif. So I think it's I don't know. I think it's hopeful in that sense that you really do see a tide turning, just in recognizing that there has to be a just solution to this crisis.
Yeah, I think Rashid makes a very good point, because and he juxtaposes the first Intifada with the second Intifada. I covered both of them. So the first Intifada was largely nonviolent. But the point he makes, like with the March of Return, where you had a largely nonviolent protest along the security barrier separating Gaza from Israel, and you had Israeli snipers shooting journalists, shooting medics, shooting children, and he makes the point that, in fact, the repression on the part of pre-1948, post-1948 by Israel or by the Zionists is always worse against the nonviolent movement, because it's so hard to demonize then the Palestinians. So what you had in the Second Intifada were the use of suicide bombings on buses. I covered several of them. And I remember I knew two of the leaders of Hamas. I knew Abdelaziz Rantisi, I knew Nizar Rayan, both of whom were assassinated. And I had dinner at Rantisi's house more than once. His wife was just killed. His widow was just killed a couple of weeks ago. And I remember he was a very thoughtful, came out of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, was a physician, educated in Egypt. And we dealt with the issue of suicide bombing. And my argument was that, yes, it was, that the violence that was committed by Israel against the Palestinians in terms of numbers and savagery, there was no comparison. But I said, by doing that, you lose the moral high ground that you have. And his argument back was, we'll stop killing their children when they stop killing our children. And of course, far more Palestinian children have been killed.
Not much.
Why doesn't everybody just stop killing children? Children aren't the reason for the problem. So let's just avoid them. Because of men, women, children. I gotta believe the children didn't do any of this. Either side. So let's just... You can include pets in that too. Goldfish for sure had nothing to do with it. But children, let's just leave them out of it. Because that, once you start killing children, then really, for the last hour, I've had a crazy hair or something that just keeps floating down, and I'm going to punch myself in the face trying to take out this hair. It's not there now. Okay. What was I saying? Yeah, let's stop killing children. Don't you do that. Is it an eyelash? What are you? What are you? As it's going to speak to me. I'm just a wild hare. Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. Of all the, like, children had nothing to do with it. And as soon as a couple children die here, and then retaliation, a couple children, and then a couple more children, then you're basic. Once children start getting killed, you've closed the door for any responsible, hey, let's pump the brakes here and see what's going on. Because once you start killing children, it's irrational. Both sides instantly amp up, and it's war. Oh, you want to kill my children? I'll kill your children. And like, just slow down. Let's think. Let's be rational. Or try to be.
An argument, not a moral argument, certainly. It's interesting.
No.
Yeah. Ismail Abu Shanab, who was one of the founding members, was actually opposed to it and thought it was not a wise thing, but I think he succumbed to the majority vote. But I think that's, for me, I've always been opposed to that. And I really believe by the Sharia of Islam would never, I genuinely believe that it would never sanction suicide bombing. Least of all reasons is it opens the door to deeply depressed people to commit suicide in a kind of noble way, quote unquote. But I think
what is the thought process on that to the Muslim side? A suicide bomber, in a way, is committing suicide. But are they not frowned upon if they're committing suicide in like an act of war, to where they are killing other people? Are they religiously, are they still looked at, well, you committed suicide, but they did it for a reason? This is not related to this, but I'm trying to figure out the rationale on this, because to me, if you still committed suicide, it's still frowned upon in a religious aspect. Like, I think that suicide is just, I knew a couple people who did, and there is an instant hatred of that person from me. And I think it's because there are outlets, there are ways where you can say things, and some people, I did this, you instantly start thinking about the person. What did I miss? What could I have done? And there is this anguish inside because you think, I failed that person. But then I start thinking about it and I'm like, I didn't fail that person. I can't know what's wrong if you don't tell me. I'm not going to guess. I don't read your mind. If you stub your toe and you're walking around normal, that's awesome. But if you kill yourself because you stubbed your toe, I'm going to think, and this is just, but I'm going to think, wow, I didn't even know they were suffering. Stubbing a toe is a terrible way to put it, but I didn't know that person was suffering. And then I get mad because them doing that leaves me feeling like I could have done more. And so I get angry at that, because it's like, I could have done more if you told me. But if you don't tell me and you off yourself, I hate you. From the bottom of my heart, I hate you. I hate everything about you. I hate my interactions with you. I hate ever knowing you, because I feel like that is such a selfish thing. And you are eliminating the problem. Now, we're going to put a pin in this and I'll come back to it. But you're eliminating a problem that now everyone else is forced to deal with. They're not dealing with your problem. They're dealing with your death. Put a pin in that, as I said. I'll come back to it. I feel differently if somebody has cancer or they're suffering completely. I understand that, and I'm okay with that, because if you're dealing with cancer or some kind of terrible disease and you're gonna die, I understand that. You don't want to suffer. I get that, and I'm okay with that. My my Nana, as we call her, my mom's mom, she was diagnosed with cancer. She had breast cancer several times. She beat it. She got diagnosed with cancer for the, I don't know, I'll say third time. And this time it had spread to the ribs. And it was spreading very fast. It was very aggressive. And she basically said she didn't want to fight anymore. I think she was 79. And from the time that I found out, I mean, she was gone less than a year. She didn't treat it. Basically just said, I'm going to live out the rest of my life. Ended up getting bedridden, just reading. And then I remember visiting her when she was pretty much out of it, and just seeing her trying to sleep in a bed and just taking these deep gasping breaths. And it was so hard to be in there, and I refused. When I could hear it, I refused to be in the room. Not that I was mad at her, but I couldn't be there. And after she passed, people went in to pay their respects, and I just went to the doorway and looked in. Had no interest to be in there. That wasn't, I didn't want to remember that. I didn't want that to be the final image. Because there were so many times when I was over at her house and I had conversations with her, and I'm getting sad. And just seeing how she was so welcoming and so comforting and so loving, and to see her just flash a smile at you made you feel good. Really made you feel good. And that is what I wanted to remember. So when I think of things, especially moments, I think of sitting in her backyard when I used to go over and help her do yard work, and sitting in her backyard, and she didn't have a lot of money to pay me. She never wanted the money. It was more just to do it for free, help her out. But she would always go up and get me lunch. And the lunch, you know, it was never anything spectacular, but it was good, but like it wasn't expensive or anything like that. And I remember eating and then sitting around talking to her before I went back. And it could be the spring going into summer, and it's a little warm, and she would come out and, okay, soda break, here's some soda, or do you want a cup of hot tea? And it's like, no, I really don't want hot tea. It's 90 degrees outside. I'm sweating through my clothes. Tea, not really what I want. I don't even really want soda. I prefer water, because soda's just going to get my mouth all gummy. But yeah, I don't know how I got off topic here. But I was just curious as to, you know, what if a suicide bomber, it's still suicide, you know? I got off on a little tangent there. Apologize.
It's very clear that from this book, one of the things that really affected me was
just to quickly end that, my Nana, her name was Doreen. She passed away June 30th, 2007, Saturday morning. From basically her heart gave out on her body, and so she passed. And I'm just kind of telling the end of that. June 30th, 2007, Saturday morning. I think she died around 9 something in the morning. Less than 5 years later, I had a conversation with my mom. And my mom was telling me that she expected to live in her 70s. And she was 64. She was going to be retiring. This was, in fact, this was end of May 2012. Yeah, end of May 2012. We were having this conversation. And she died a month later. My mom died June 30th, 2012, Saturday morning. 5 years to the day, the exact day. And so, just kind of putting a little thing and just kind of ending the story with my Nana, but just also the coincidence of my mom and them dying the same day. It was brutal. Both days were brutal. Even today, still brutal. And then the thing is, June 30th, we buried her July 5th. So 4th of July, celebrate independence. July 5th, you know, I remember. And then it's a month later, August 7th, would be her birthday. So it's kind of like this 6 week window, 5 week window, where it's just like, just seems like it's a lot about her.
Iqbal Ahmed's assessment of the idea of violent resistance, and the fact that they brought him in, and this guy, he was in the Algerian Revolution. He was a compatriot with Frantz Fanon, and he actually did support violent resistance to settler colonialism. But he thought it was a completely untenable strategy for the Palestinians because of the historicity of their own narrative of suffering and the Holocaust. And I think one of the most fascinating aspects to me of the effectiveness of the Israeli perspective is that they have made it David and Goliath, but they're the David and the Palestinians are the Goliath. And I find that so amazing that kind of leisure domain could actually pass muster, because the British knew that they wouldn't win 48. That was already in all of their documents, even though the British backed the Palestinians in that war and gave them the weapons and things. But they knew that they had totally ineffective leadership. They knew that they were militarily completely incapable. And they also knew 67, 73. I mean, it's just amazing that they've known that the superiority militarily of this country has been so massively asymmetrical. And yet, people really think the Palestinians somehow are an existential threat to the Israeli people.
Yeah, it's even worse than that, Hamza. I mean, you have Netanyahu calling them the new Nazis. So it's not just the David and Goliath narrative, which is ridiculous. The Palestinians don't have artillery. They don't have mechanized units. They don't have an air force. They don't have naval guns. They don't have Hellfire missiles. They don't have attack helicopters. They're trapped in let's call it what it is, a concentration camp, being leveled as we speak. And of course, you can't even describe that, I would argue, as a war. So it's the language that's used is not only a distortion in terms of the balance of power, but it's the way Palestinians are dehumanized and demonized and painted as a kind of absolute evil. I mean, if you see the media, when they describe Israeli victims from October 7th, and these were certainly horrible, many cases, atrocities, it's always a doctor or a teacher or a mother. But the Palestinians they're not individualized. They're a dehumanized mass. We don't hear about Palestinian poets or this or and of course we had the New York Times, my former employer, run an editorial, which I just couldn't believe it when I read it, saying there shouldn't be a ceasefire. It was remarkable.
Yeah, I think the aspect of the warmongering element, just this idea somehow that that there's some level of proportionality here, and that also there's another narrative that really I think troubles me deeply, that people still seem to be able to say it with a straight face. This idea that we don't target civilians, and the idea, one of the things that they use, and I've seen this in several interviews, is they use the Dresden bombings as this kind of moral justification. Like, the West bombed Dresden to get rid of the Nazis, but they targeted specifically civilians, and that was somehow acceptable in the West. And then they make the argument that we don't specifically target civilians, and so there's no moral equivalency here. One of the things, I don't know if you've had a chance to see that book, but it's by A.C. Grayling, Among the Dead Cities.
Yeah, I know it.
Yeah, and so he makes an argument, and I thought this was really fascinating. He makes an argument that the reason in 1977 the Geneva Convention Protocol 1 of 1977, it was actually addressed to deal with the fact that they came to terms that aerial bombardment was criminal activity. You know, that in essence, bombing civilians is a war crime. And Grayling makes an argument that Churchill was guilty of war crimes, you know, and that it was morally unjustifiable. And he actually makes an argument that the bombers should have refused.
Okay. Didn't Germany bomb London? And I'm asking because I know they did. My dad was born in London. He was born in the basement of the place where the fireplace mantle cracked. So, again, I'm not saying that one is wrong, but they were bombing England, UK, London, the British. I don't know what I'm supposed to say. They were bombing them, so Churchill bombed them. It's the same thing. One does it, the other retaliates. How is it that one does it, the retaliator is the one that we're frowning upon? Shouldn't we frown on both? And I'm talking about Germany and England. One is morally okay and the other one isn't. I'm not understanding the logic on that, because they're both wrong. If one's wrong, then the other one's wrong too. But Churchill survived, so he should be charged as a criminal. Hitler killed himself, so he's not the criminal? Doesn't make any sense.
To bomb civilian targets. And one of the fascinating things to me was that Simpson, when the US chose to use nuclear weapons on the Japanese, they chose two largely civilian populations, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but they actually originally intended to blow up Kyoto, which is, I mean, I've visited Kyoto. It's one of the most beautiful cities in the world. But Simpson argued against it because he had actually visited Kyoto and was so struck by how beautiful it was that he said it would be a crime to destroy that city. So it's not a crime to destroy, you know, tens of thousands of people, but to destroy these.
And I could be wrong. I'm going off memory. I don't know. World War II, I haven't gotten into a lot of. But I thought both of those, yes, they were civilian, but it was also military. So I think this has been a long video. I'm gonna pause this because I want to look that up just to double check. Okay, everyone, so I'm back. So I did a little digging. Yeah, there was, for Hiroshima, there were more civilians that died than military, but Hiroshima was a city of industrial and military significance. A number of military units were located nearby, the most important of which was the headquarters of Field Marshal Shunroku Hata's 2nd General Army, and was located in Hiroshima Castle. Oh no, I went back. I didn't mean to go back. I gotta go. Okay, hold on. Now let me look at this other one. The city of Nagasaki had been one of the largest seaports in southern Japan and was of great wartime importance because of its wide-ranging industrial activity, including the production of ordnance, ships, military equipment, and other war materials. 4th largest company in the city were Mitsubishi Shipyard. Okay, so Nagasaki also had more civilian deaths than soldiers, but the reason why I brought it up was to so easily just say, oh no, yeah, they totally went for civilians. No, they didn't. Those were military targets. Civilians live around military installations because they work there. Yes, they're still civilian, but those were military targets. Civilians died, though. Yes. So I'm countering what he said because I think he's saying it to make it seem like, yeah, no, everyone's okay with killing civilians. Civilians die all the time. If those civilians are working in military thing, they're not soldiers, but they are working for the military. I'm not justifying it. I'm just simply saying those targets were legitimately military targets. Again, I'm not saying whether dropping the bomb was right or wrong, but I'm defending those targets. Not saying that the bomb should have been used on those targets, those bombs. I'm just saying.
Works of art would be a crime. And I think this distortion, this moral distortion.
Yeah, I think you're morally distorting things from here and there. That's just me.
That seems so evident. The fact that that's missed on so many people, I don't know. I mean, I read Sven Lindqvist's book, History of Aerial Bombardment, and the first bombings were actually done by the Italians on Bedouin in Libya, and they just dropped bombs on Bedouins to see if it worked or not. And then Churchill used them to test the British airplanes on Iraqi Bedouin. Like, oh, the Italians, that's a good idea. Let's see if it works with our planes as well. So they actually just bombed, and that gets to I don't like to use the race card, but the overt racism and this Eurocentric superiority is just another thing that seems to me so profoundly evident. And I think that's why so many young people are rejecting this narrative, because I think a lot of them are coming to terms with a lot of the painful aspects of European and also Canadian American and South American history.
Yeah, and you talked about the way Israel. I mean, they use euphemisms to describe mass murder, which, of course, as somebody who was reporting, I've been in Gaza when it was hit by Israeli warplanes. So Israeli children who are murdered are caught in the crossfire, or when they bomb houses and apartment blocks, it's a surgical strike on a bomb-making factory, or when they destroy Palestinian homes, it's the demolition of the homes of terrorists. I mean, it's just completely predictable. So we would report these events, and that was always how it was countered, with these kind of, this kind of double think or logic against logic, which Orwell.
But that goes down to the propaganda of a war. You may be fighting one side, but you're going to put out propaganda to make yourself. Nobody's going to try to put themselves into being the villain. You're going to try to make the other person the villain. So everyone's doing that. It's just propaganda. It is what it is. Whether you choose to listen to it and believe it, it's up to you. But whenever I hear like Israel talking about Palestine, Palestine talking about Israel, I don't listen to any of them because I don't believe a word they're saying. It's all garbage. One side is going to attack the other because of this, and one side is going to attack the other because of that, and they're always going to assume they're correct, so they're going to slander and make the other side look bad. That's gone down in history for as far back as you could believe.
Writes about, and I think that these lies, which of course abolish any kind of ambiguity or nuance. They don't permit any gray zones. It's a kind of cognitive dissonance which feeds into the Israeli narrative of good and evil, black.
Just a side note. Hold on.
Black and white.
Okay. Black and white. He kind of went where I was thinking he was going to go. Back in the early American days, 1700s, 1800s, before the Civil War, one of the things that white American slaveholders would say, and there were some black slaveholders too, I don't think there weren't, clearly not as many, but they were far more torturous to their slaves. But we're going to get to the white people. A lot of slaveholders used to say, whether they believed it or not, we're teaching these people a trade. We're teaching them how to work hard because they didn't work hard in their country, and how to be better off and how to be good people. It's easy to say that when you own them and you're making them work for you. So I'm going along with a racist way to look at another side. That's how they looked at, you know, the early black Africans who were brought here. You know, they frowned on them. And that's how they looked at Native Americans too after a while. Was because Native Americans were always at war. Every time a war came up, they were always against the colonies. Colonial, however you want to say it. Not all. Some were on the side with. But eventually, they just looked at them like, well, they're not us. We can't trust them. And that's how, what I just said, they're not us. We can't trust them. That's pretty much how the whole world works. They're not our people, so we can't trust them.
And I think that those lies are important, and we've seen them all around Gaza, because the Israelis need them in order to, and they want to believe them. There's a kind of thirst for them, and it feeds their kind of moral superiority, that kind of logic-proof compartment of dogmatic adherence, Edward Bernays writes. And they don't want, you know, you have a population, much like the American population over Iraq and Afghanistan, they don't really want to know the truth, because the truth would force them to look at some very unpleasant aspects of themselves and their society. And then finally, I think that those lies send a very ominous message to the Palestinians, because Israelis are saying, in essence, we will wage a campaign of mass terror and genocide, and we will never take responsibility for our crimes. So it obliterates in one fell swoop the kind of dignity of human thought, human action, obliterates facts, obliterates history, obliterates hope, and it essentially reduces the entire dialogue to one of violence. So why did the hijackers on 9/11 carry out attacks against the World Trade Center and the Pentagon? Because they understood that huge explosions and death in a city skyline are how you communicate. That's how we have been communicating to the world, you know, for decades. Robert McNamara, when he orders the saturation bombing of Vietnam, called it sending a message to the North Vietnamese. And in many ways, it's the same phenomena where Israel, they call it mowing the lawn, but it's about sending a message. And as you quoted Auden, I mean, you look at any national revolt and they're very ugly. I mean, C.L.R. James, when he writes about the Haitian uprising, the only successful slave revolt in human history, and Haiti's been paying for it ever since, they tortured, it was very brutal to the French planter slaveholding class, in the same way that during the Nat Turner Rebellion, Nat Turner and his followers, also by the way religious zealots, murdered every white that they saw. Even the French Revolution, remember, they were, you know, severing the heads of clergy and aristocrats and putting them on pikes and carrying them through the streets of Paris. So that's not in any way to defend, you know, what happened on October 7th, but we have to understand. To understand is not to condone.
Right.
I just want to, I'm going to end this here, but I want to ask a question. The one thing, as I said, I'm not religious, looking into, the one thing that I see more than maybe what anyone else sees, but this is what I see first and foremost. You're talking about Jewish, you're talking about Muslim. Two different religions inhabiting a space that was taken away from Muslims, Jewish people put in. Those two religions are going to fight over this area. One side says that's their home, the other side says this is now our home. If you take out the Jewish people and you put in a different sect of Muslim, is there still a war? If you take out, replace Muslim and say it was Jewish people and they were moved out and different Jewish people were put in, is it still a war? I'm asking because I think that a lot of the fighting, a lot of the problem is two different religions. Religions have always gone to war. Doesn't matter. They always go to war. And I see this as a religious kind of thing. Even though I understand that Palestinians were removed from the territory. I get that. That's their home. I understand. It ain't gonna be now. It's taken. It's gone. When this happened, what, in the 40s? So I don't even remember. I don't even know when it started. That was when the problem started, but that was when everything should have been. But again, it is where we are now, and it's going to be hard to ever go back. And I just see it as religion fighting each other. And these videos are difficult because I do see both sides, but I don't think anyone is right. I just don't. So I'm going to end this here. We'll come back with part 3. We're knocking them out in 20 minutes. So there's a thanks button. You can donate. You don't have to. There's a subscribe button. Click that. There's a bell thing. Click that. People get mad at me for not saying it. Click the thumbs up. There is no thumbs down button. It doesn't work, so don't worry about that one. So until next time, have a good day. Have a good night.